Welcome back to UI class. So today I would like to talk about unemployment rate. In recent months, after the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, there's a new term called the Great Resignation, meaning that many people, they resign, but they do not return to the job market. So today I have prepared this article titled Great Resignation explains the cause of the decline of unemployment rates. Because in 2021, many countries reported that their unemployment rate had declined back to the pre-pandemic levels. Seems to imply that the employment market has been improving and unemployed people are now able to find jobs. But then there's a phenomenon called Great Resignation, which probably can tell the actual reasons why the unemployment rate in many countries decline. So first of all, a Great Resignation, right, is a new term which describes an increase of employees' resignation, but it is not simply resignations, because in these situations, many of the resigned are not returning back to the job market. And so it results in a decline in the labor force participation rate. In other words, even though the unemployment rate declines, but it does not necessarily imply that the unemployed can now be employed, but instead they decide not to work in the market. So it sounds to be a little bit complicated and confusing. If you would like to know more about why people are resigning, then here is a YouTube prepared by DW, which provides some more details about the reasons for the Great Resignations. And some of them argue that it may be the pandemic, which enable online work from home. And so it opens up new types of jobs or allow people to set up new startups, which enable more people to choose not to work in traditional workplaces, and probably it may be the reason. But today, the focus of this YouTube is to explain the underlying reasons why Great Resignation would result in a decline in unemployment rate, which does not necessarily mean that the unemployed are now employed. To refer to the labor force participation rate to find evidence on this hypothesis, because labor force participation rate refers to the ratio or percentage, if you like, of the working population who are employed plus people they are unemployed but are looking for jobs, and then divided by the total population age 15 and over. Let me show you the equation. So the equation 1 here, labor force participation rate is a ratio, right? The working population divided by the population at and about 15 years old, right, of the whole city or the whole country. But then it must be emphasized that the definition of working population includes both the employed and the unemployed. Before the outbreak of the pandemic, usually when the unemployed find a job, then they will be counted in the number of employed. So the sum does not change. So basically, labor force participation rate has been very steady in the past, and it usually would decline very slowly, probably due to the aging population. So the denominator would be shrinking. But then in this situation, a sudden reduction in the labor force participation rate is more likely to be caused by a change in the denominator. But then when people, they are unemployed, but then if they decide to leave the job market, that means they do not look for jobs anymore. Then they are not employed, they are not unemployed either. It results in a reduction in the labor force participation rate. So it also would affect unemployment rate, because unemployment rate is defined by a ratio, the number of unemployed divided by the working populations. So as defined above, right, working population include both the employed and the unemployed. So now, when more people leave the job market and do not look for jobs, so denominator would be shrinking. The denominator would also be reducing, and reducing in a greater proportion in the denominator. The definition of unemployed refers to people, they are unemployed in the past 7 days, and they can be employed, and they are looking for jobs in the past 30 days. So if they are not looking for jobs in the past 30 days, they are not considered to be unemployed. So let me show you an example. Now, here is an example. The first row refers to the baseline situation. Let's say in the city, we have 90 employed, 10 unemployed, and 50, they are not looking for jobs. So in total, 90 plus 10 plus 50, right, will be 150 people aged above 15. Labor force participation rate refers to 90 plus 10, the working population, divided by 150. So that's a 67% participation rate. And unemployment rate refers to the number of unemployed divided by the working population, 100. So that's 10% unemployment rate. So let's say now the same number of employed, but 5 unemployed decided not to look for jobs. So they become people neither employed nor unemployed. The total population is the same. But then, because of this reduction, the participation rate is reduced to 63%, and the unemployment rate is also reduced to 5.3%. To the extreme, if all the 10 unemployed decide not to find jobs, then the unemployment rate can be 0, and the participation rate further reduced to 60%. So these examples tell us that a reduction in unemployment rate does not necessarily means that the unemployed are now employed. In this example, indeed, the unemployed simply give up hopes and decide not to look for jobs. Then the unemployment rate will still be reducing. So there are some evidence in the recent trends of the labor force participation rate in many countries. Say, for example, here, the US participation rate shows that before the pandemic, right, it is quite steady at about 63%, but then the pandemic got a plummet. It's reasonable as many people decided not to find jobs during this disruption period, and then it rebounded back to only 61.5% only. And here shows a big gap of about 1.5% difference. So similarly, in the UK, right before the pandemic, the participation rate has been increasing, but then the pandemic resulted in continuous reduction in the participation rate. And even though in 2021, it seems to be rebounding, but then it leveled off at below 79%, which is also about 1% difference. Here shows the situation in Hong Kong. The labor force participation rate before the pandemic was about 61%, but then the pandemic resulted in a punch, then the rebound level off at just below 60%. So it is also about 1.5% difference here. Such a 1% fall in labor force participation rate represents a large number of people. So take Hong Kong data as an example. The 1% fall in labor force participation rate represents about 140,000 people leaving the job market, and they are not counted in the working population. They are neither employed nor unemployed. According to the Census and Statistics Department's data, there was a 1.6% decrease of labor force participation rate from 2018 to 2020, which represents a decrease of about 90,000 people in the labor force. And then up to November 2021, less than 1 year time, the working population is further reduced by more than 50,000 people. So summing up, it amounts to about 140,000 people. They designed not to find jobs. So if you simply focus on unemployment rate, here shows you 9 countries and Hong Kong unemployment rate. Many of them really shows a declining trend. As say, for example, the orange line represents Canada, it fell from 13% down to about 7% now. And also the Australia, and the UK, many of them are now returning back to the pre-COVID level of unemployment. With the understanding about the Great Resignation trend, together with the decreasing labor force participation rate, we have to interpret the downward trend of unemployment rate after the pandemic, as it does not mean the unemployed are now employed. Many people decide not to find jobs.